Okay, Alan, what point are you making in your Jerusalem Post piece?
Well, the point I'm making is that Black Lives Matter is a great cause. We care deeply about Black lives. I've been fighting for Black lives since I was a young man. I went south. I argued in the civil rights movement. I argued on behalf of death row inmates who were African American. I have a long history of opposing police abuse of African Americans. But Black Lives Matter, in its platform in 2016, accused Israel of genocide against the Palestinian people and of apartheid. The only country mentioned in its platform, Syria isn't mentioned, Hamas isn't mentioned, the South American countries, Philippines that have police abuse all over, never mentioned, just Israel. It was an anti-Semitic, in addition to anti-Zionist platform, and I called them out on it. First in 2016 in a liberal newspaper, the Boston Globe, in a widely circulated article urging Black Lives Matter to change their platform. And now when these demonstrations came, and I support the demonstrations, I support protests against police abuse, many of the protests turned to anti-Israel activities. They painted pictures of the man who was killed wearing a keffiyeh. They talked about Black Lives Matter as urging divestment against Israel, false claims that Israel trained the Minneapolis policeman who killed George Floyd, all of them false. And so I decided to invoke the phrase of Hillel, Im ein ani li mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? And I use that in my article. I am for Black lives being preserved and against police who abuse it, but I'm for myself as well and for the Jewish community. And I think it's very important to emphasize that the hijacking of these legitimate protests by the anti-Israel cause is hurting Black Lives Matter, is hurting the cause, and is hurting Jews. So it's a lose-lose, and I wish they would stop hijacking a legitimate protest and turning it against Israel.
You heard my open. What do you think is behind the attempt to, vilify you for making, again, what I feel is an obviously true statement? What's happening in not only in America in general, but within elements of our Jewish community that would prompt this kind of criticism of you?
Well, you have to pick sides today. And if you pick the side of Black Lives Matter, then you can't say anything critical of them. Look, there are some people on the Israel side who say the same thing. If you pick the side of Israel, you can't be critical of Israel. I am critical of certain Israel activities, and I will continue to be critical when an Israeli soldier shoots a Palestinian who is mentally disturbed. Everybody criticized that from the prime minister down, and there'll be an investigation. The difference is that in Israel, when something like that happens, there is a thorough investigation, and there are prosecutions when prosecutions are warranted. But today in America, you have to pick sides. And if you're seen as pro-Trump, even though I'm a liberal Democrat who supported Hillary Clinton, if you're seen as helping Trump, you're vilified. If you're seen as criticizing Black Lives Matter, you're criticized. There's no room for nuance. There's no room for calibration. Mm-hmm. I've lived my life on nuance and trying to strike the appropriate balance. I've lived my life by imposing on myself and on others what I call the shoe on the other foot test. Ask yourself how you would react if the shoe were on the other foot, if it were Hillary Clinton who were being impeached, or if it were Jews who were being attacked by police, as they were, of course, in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s. So we always have to put ourselves in the position of others. And when you do that, everything turns gray. It's very rare that you see anything that's absolutely black and white. Now, the issue of police abuse is not a gray area. There should be zero tolerance for police abuse. But Black Lives Matter and other organizations on the hard left shouldn't be turning these protests into hijacked protests against Israel, against the Jewish people, and that has to stop. The fact that there were graffiti on synagogues in Los Angeles, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel graffiti, There's no excuse for that. Jews were not responsible. Israel is not responsible for what happened in Minneapolis. Let's focus on the real issue. And I'm going to
Yes.
continue doing that, whether the 92nd Street Y invites me to speak or not. They are the real villain here because they're the ones who deplatformed me. They're the ones who wouldn't allow me to speak about a book I wrote in defense of Israel, because even though they admitted that I hadn't done anything wrong, well, they didn't want any trouble. They didn't want any controversy. Other than Elie Wiesel, I was the most popular and most frequent speaker in the 92nd Street Y. And now they've turned against me, as have other Jewish organizations, which want to see what side you're on. They don't want nuance. They don't want discussion. They don't want pilpul. They don't want Talmudic discussions. They don't want anything to end up teku. They want to know what the right side is, and the right side is Black Lives Matter, even if they're anti-Semitic and anti-Israel.